Asalaamu alaikum, everyone. It's Avalon. I just want to give you a little disclaimer for this episode. So, I recorded this episode normally, and then to my chagrin, when I went to record it or when I went to edit it, I realized that it did not record through my mic. It recorded through my laptop built in mic. So, you're going to notice a big difference in quality. The quality is not as good as it usually would be, like it is right now, because I'm recording with my actual mic right now. Don't know what went wrong, but I actually put a poll on my podcast Instagram and asked you guys, and the overwhelming majority said keep the episode. Even with bad audio, we still want to hear about this topic. So this is a longer episode and the audio is not great, but it's still like you can still understand what I'm saying, at least, inshaAllah. So just wanted to give that heads up. Inshallah, next episode will be back to normal. Right? Enjoy the show.
Asalaamu alaikum, and welcome back to Reborn Muslim, the podcast all about being a revert to Islam. I'm your host Avalon, and today I want to talk about marriage again. I want to talk about how reverts find a spouse. This is a question I get from other sisters, as well as just something I've been struggling with personally, like on a personal level, for 3 years, since I've been Muslim, for as long as I've been Muslim. So it's a very complicated topic to navigate, and a little spoiler alert, I'm not going to be finding like a solution. Okay, we're not going to be working towards an ultimate solution at the end of this episode. It's not like other episodes where sometimes I'm like presenting an issue and then giving you my advice and saying, hey, this is how I deal with it. This is not quite the same as those kind of episodes, because I don't have an answer. I have solutions that are like idealistic, that I would hope these things would change in the ummah. But really, this is just going to be more of a discussion and trying, I'll try not to be too negative and just be like, well, this sucks and it's just the way it is. Like, I'll try not to have that kind of outlook, because there's no use in that. But I do want to at least talk about it and bring attention to it, because I think that if I am not able to provide a solution, because sometimes sisters are like, I'm struggling with the hijab. It's like, okay, we can talk about that. I can give you my honest advice, because I've gone through that and like, alhamdulillah, made it out. You know what I mean? So I have advice to give. In this case, I don't really have advice as much as I want to share my personal experience without getting into too much detail, of course. So just like some experiences I've had, the issues I've experienced, as well as bigger picture issues, and why I want to talk about this, why I think it's such an important thing to talk about. First of all, the marriage crisis for reverts, but more broadly, the marriage crisis in the ummah today, because this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, an issue only plaguing reverts. It's all Muslims, especially like millennial Muslims who are not married, or just younger Muslims in general who are not married and who want to be. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Again, inshallah, I'll try not to be negative or anything. I just want to share my thoughts, my experiences, and hopefully something can change in the future, inshallah. So with all that being said, in the name of Allah, Bismillah, let's get started. Okay, so as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about my background. So I converted to Islam in 2020, as I've said before, and I've really been trying to get married, or at least been open to marriage, since I converted in 2020. So for 3 years now, I've either been actively trying to get married, like trying to meet someone, or just, again, at least open to the idea and not like, no, please don't introduce me to someone. I don't want to marry anyone. You know what I mean? So for 3 years, I've been open to marriage, wanting to get married. Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that like I didn't get married right after I converted, because there was just so much to learn, and I know that like in order to protect myself, like I needed to not get married at that point. And I really don't recommend anyone to get married right after converting. There's always different circumstances, if you had a Muslim partner and you're in a haram relationship and then you end up converting, yeah, it's good to get married. You know what I mean? That's kind of a different situation. But by and large, I discourage reverts from like looking for a spouse immediately after getting married, or definitely I discourage that. I discourage any revert from immediately looking for a spouse, like going out and trying to meet someone right after converting, just because there's too much to learn, and it's such a process to go through. And I really do recommend going through that process, not necessarily alone, but in terms of like Like with a spouse, it's going to be different. Like I would say, again, everyone's situation is different. Some people are already married before. But I would say just try not to right after. Just give yourself at least some time to process, to adjust, to learn, and to get in a more secure area with your faith before you look for a husband or a wife. So the reason I say that is because, again, I believe that it's a blessing that I did not find a husband early on, even though I was looking. I was looking in all the wrong places and in the wrong ways. And alhamdulillah that I did not end up getting married, because I know it would not have benefited me in the long run if I had married someone at that point, because I wouldn't have known what to look for, That's another big thing. So throughout the years, the 3 years that I've been Muslim now, like once this episode's coming out, it's been officially over 3 years. I've had very little success. I did come somewhat close to getting married. I was actually engaged for a few months in 2022, and that's a story for a different time, a different episode perhaps. But other than that, I've had very little success. And in fact, on the contrary, I've experienced some of the worst heartbreaks and the most devastating experiences with men since converting. And that's really sad to say, but it is the truth, and it's not unique to me, unfortunately, because sometimes I talk about these issues and people are like, especially when I post about it on like Instagram, people are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you went through that. I'm so sorry, Avalon." And I'm like, thank you. But at the same time, like, what you don't realize is that like my story is a drop in the ocean. There are thousands of other revert Muslimas going through the exact same things. And I talk about these things in the past tense. I went through those things. These sisters are going through it right now, presently. So I try to always remind people, thank you for the sympathy. Thank you for being there for me and like caring and listening and understanding and believing me. But also, please don't forget that my story and my experiences are actually not that unique. And a lot of sisters experience the same thing. That's why any post you see of mine on Instagram where I'm talking about some crazy thing a man has said to me, you're going to see the comments flooded with revert sisters saying exactly the same thing happened to me, or giving their horror stories in the comments. So again, this is just a reminder. I've been through a lot since converting, especially when it comes to men, and it's not a unique experience. A lot of revert Muslims go through the same. So where have I been looking for a spouse? That's one thing to talk about, right? So I definitely have tried the Muslim marriage, I'm using air quotes, you can't see them, but I'm using air quotes, marriage apps or services. And we'll get more into that later, but I'm just going to list a few things here. So that's one thing I've tried. I've also, like a few times now, I've let friends set me up with brothers that they think I was a good fit for. One time it was with a sister that I'm like acquaintances with, a really nice sister. May Allah bless her. She does a lot for her masjid, and yeah, she's a friend of mine. And she set me up with her actual brother. And there's been just situations, at different situations. Either it's their brother, or it's someone that they know, or it's, maybe their husband's friend. That happened as well. So I've had sisters reaching out and saying, "Hey, I think you'd be a good fit with so-and-so." And that's happened, like, it didn't happen for years. That's a funny thing, like maybe 2.5 years of being Muslim. That never happened to me once. And then all of a sudden, within like a few months, I think like 4 or 5 sisters in my life came up and like brought it up to me, like, "Hey, I know someone." And I'm like, "What? Why didn't you guys tell me this before? Like, where was everyone before?" But yeah, that was another like avenue that I've like explored. And I've also tried attending events for Muslim women and men in my age range. So for example, there are like young professional Muslim events that some masjids near me will hold. And they're not marriage events by any means, but there's always kind of like a underlying intention of like, hey, these are people your age, they're Muslim, they're coming to the masjid. Like, it's never just like some random thing. There's usually like some kind of, Islamic like talk. Like there's going to be like either an imam or a scholar or someone from our community giving us a talk about whatever topic it might be. And so it's like, we're there for the purpose of Allah. We're there to learn and to socialize also, and to meet other sisters and to meet other brothers for the men. But there's also that underlying idea of like, hey, this is a good, wholesome place to meet a spouse, So I don't want to say that's the only reason I've attended those events, because I actually do get a like benefit from it otherwise. But that is definitely something that I keep in the back of my mind when I go to such events. And I know I'm not the only one. I know other people do the same thing. So I've tried those kind of events. On top of all that, I spend a lot of my time at my masjid, or at, honestly, masjids throughout Southern California. There's a lot of masjids, and they're all good for different reasons, mashallah. So I spend a lot of my time at masjids and, working with Islamic organizations, which is always like the default answer when you ask someone or you say to any Muslim, it's like, I don't know where to find a spouse. I don't know what, I want to get married and I don't know where to find someone. I don't know where to meet someone. I'm sure you can relate to this if you're Muslim and you're listening to this. The default answer is always go to the masjid, meet someone at the masjid, just meet someone at the masjid. There's a lot of good people there, which I get it. I really do, because obviously if you meet someone who's, again, meets your specifications, like around your age, whatever, and they're going to the masjid, that's a good sign. At least that's something to go off of. But it's a very empty answer. It's pretty much the same, in my opinion. It's the same as when you're going through a really complex situation and you're struggling heavily, and you bring it up to a Muslim friend or an imam or whoever it might be, and their response is, "Oh, just make dua." It's like, yeah, I think I knew that. Thank you. But I think I got that covered. Yeah, I've been making dua. Usually we already knew that, you know what I mean? It's just kind of an empty response. It's like that old joke of you say you're depressed and someone's like, "Oh, have you been drinking enough water?" And you're like, "Yeah, I've been drinking enough water." That has nothing to do with depression. So I just want to mention that because, again, it's in case somebody's thinking, just go to the masjid. Trust me, I've been going to the masjid. And then on top of all of those different, avenues I've kind of explored, I also almost signed up for an in-person matchmaking event. I don't know if you guys listening have ever heard of this, but they have these sort of, Islamic organizations, their matrimony services, and they'll have events, matchmaking events. You sign up for it, you pay whatever, $100 or whatever it is. It's always a pretty good amount. And then you go, and they have, I think for some of them, I feel like they're more selective than others. They only let certain people who sign up actually go. Because they just want a certain standard, I guess. I don't know. And so they don't let everyone in. And then I think the way it works out is that there's an equal amount of men and women, I would assume. So they have these kind of services, and alhamdulillah that people are putting the effort in and making these events happen, and trying to make a space, a wholesome Islamic space for people to meet. But if I'm just being very honest, I know sisters who have gone to these, such events, and I've only heard kind of bad reviews. I haven't really heard any good reviews. I haven't heard, personally, I don't know anyone who's met through these kind of matchmaking events. I know a lot of people who've met through Muslim marriage apps. I've never met somebody who met through these matchmaking events. But to be fair, how many thousands of people are on the apps and how few people go to these events, it makes sense. I'm not trying to compare the two. It's not comparable. But it just kind of seems like a waste of time and money to me, because it is a lot of money, and it's why am I going to pay $100 just to go feel awkward around a group of men, and none of them are a good fit for me. And also I've heard it's very coerced, or it feels coerced, or it feels forced, just because obviously you're going to be putting your best face forward and trying your best to impress other people and to impress a potential spouse. So it's just the apps. It's not very genuine from what I've heard. So I almost signed up for one of those in a moment of desperation. And then I was like, you know what? No, I'm not going to do this. Not to say anything bad about them. I think they have very good intention. But again, I haven't heard great reviews. And it's just not for me. I've also come very close to just straight up asking an imam at one of my masjids, or asking, a brother or someone in leadership at one of the masjids that I go to, somebody that I would be familiar with, to just keep an eye out for me and let me know if there's any brothers my age looking to get married. But I'm still too shy to do that. And it's kind of the same situation. I'm am I desperate enough to have that conversation with an imam that it's not desperate. And if you do that, it's a good thing. Honestly, more power to you. It's just I can't bring myself to, even though that would definitely be a good avenue. It might take a long time for them to actually find someone, but also imams are super busy, dude. Imams have so much on their plate, honestly, that sometimes I feel bad, reaching out and giving them one more thing to look out for. You know what I mean? Because I know that's like not necessarily their job. I mean, it's not their job. They have like a million jobs, and that's not really one of them. So yeah, I haven't done that. Okay, so now the question still remains. How are reverts supposed to find a spouse? If you're a Muslim revert, how are you supposed to find someone? Or honestly, this pretty much applies to like born Muslims as well. Like, how are we supposed to find spouses? But this is a lot more specific to reverts. So let me just say this. Most reverts I know, this is personal experience. I'm just going to preface that what I'm about to say. This is from personal experience. This is anecdotal. But I've heard the same from other people who know reverts and other reverts themselves. Most reverts I know are either divorced or never married. Like those two categories of like not married currently encompass like most of the reverts that I'm familiar with, that I know. However, that being said, I do know reverts who are in happy, healthy, wholesome, alhamdulillah, like good marriages, mashallah, like very strong marriages to reverts, to fellow reverts, or to born Muslims. Like, I will not deny that that is completely true. I know people in that situation. But most of the reverts I know are either divorced or never been married. Now, everybody's story is different. Okay, I can't speak for all reverts. I can't speak for all Muslims. Of course, like everybody has a different story. So these are just generalizations that I'm talking about. But from my own calculations, okay, from my experience, like when I've been, like through all of the reverts that I've met, many, I don't know if I'd say most, but I would say many of the currently married reverts, like reverts who are married right now to a Muslim, many of them married the person who introduced them to Islam in the first place. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So like either they knew each other before, like I'll give you a scenario, Muslim guy, non-Muslim woman, they knew each other, they were friends, or maybe they went to school together, maybe they were teenagers. They knew each other somehow. And then the man maybe told her about Islam. She ended up converting and then they got married. Or here's another situation that's actually very common. It's not ideal, but it happens. Muslim man, non-Muslim girl, they're dating, okay? And then the girl decides, hey, I'm going to convert to Islam. And then they get married. MashaAllah. It's not the best situation, but it's like, as long as you make it halal, like, great. Again, we shouldn't strive to be in haram relationships ever. But if you make it halal, like, good. At least you're making the right moves, So those two scenarios, or even, I know one sister specifically who has a whole family of her own. She has kids of her own and a husband, and they're all a denomination of Christianity. And then she converted to Islam, and she's still married to her husband. So she's, mashallah, she's doing her best, and she's like making it work. And, we pray that Allah guides her husband and her family to Islam as well. I mean, but that's like a rarer situation. I would say that doesn't happen quite as much. So like many, many, many of the revert sisters I know who are married, again, they married the person who introduced them to Islam, or that they knew before becoming Muslim. Like they just met them out in life. Again, school, or honestly, that's usually where it is. I was trying to think of another like example of where they could have met. It usually ends up being school, because like Muslim men, like they're not going to be meeting women other places, right? Except if it was the situation of haram relationship. But you see what I'm saying? Like they knew each other before. Other revert sisters that I know who are married met through mutual friends or through marriage apps or services, like I mentioned. So I know one sister, she has a really cool story. We actually have the same mentor, so that's how we know each other. And I attended her marriage, or her wedding. My mom even attended her wedding. It was really cool. And her husband is also a revert. So they're both reverts. Her husband converted first. He has a really cool story, mashallah. He converted, and I believe they already knew each other, like I think through like mutual friends. So I think they already knew each other pretty much. But basically he started talking to her and like telling her about Islam. And then she just was like so moved by it. She's like, you know what? This is the right faith for me. She converted. And then they got married, mashallah. So I think they knew each other well before either of them were married, from what I understand. But definitely they knew each other before she converted. And then they got married after. So, mashallah, I think it's such a sweet story. But so you see what I mean? Like some of them will meet through mutual friends or whatever it may be. And then I do know like more than a few people, I would say, who have met through apps. That's definitely the case. I know one sister who's not a revert, but she met her husband through whatever it was, like Salams or Muzz or one of those apps. And she's actually from UK. She's from England. And her husband is from here in California. And they met and they just like instantly connected, instantly fell in love. And she moved out here to California. MashaAllah. And they're really happy together. So it does happen. It definitely does happen. And I don't want to pretend that that doesn't happen. However, not to, after all those sweet, heartwarming stories, not to be negative, but the fact still remains that most of the reverts I know are not married. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think I just happen to know a bunch of reverts that are single. Because, again, although the marriage crisis is affecting the ummah at large, I would say it's even worse for reverts because we have additional obstacles, which I'll be getting into. And that kind of segues into this very harmful and annoying myth that I hear all the time, which is this. It's so easy for reverts to get married because everyone wants to marry a revert. That's what I hear. I actually hear that all the time, particularly from sisters. Like, oh, every Muslim man wants to marry a revert. It's so easy for reverts to get married. There's so many options. And they're not saying it. And I'm not saying it, and the men aren't saying it, but let's just be honest. What they're saying when they tell me that, when they say it's easy for reverts to get married because everyone wants to marry a revert, if we take away all of the niceties, what they're really saying is every Muslim man wants to marry a white girl. That's what they're saying. And is that true? No, that's not even true at all. There's many, many Muslim men who only want to marry within their culture. I'm not saying that's true, and I don't believe it's true. But that's what they're saying. When they say Muslim men want to marry a revert, what they're saying is Muslim men want to marry a white girl. That's their way of saying it. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, they're not, because that's weird to tell someone that. They're not going to just straight up tell me that, like, oh, but you're white. You know what I mean? But that's what it's coming down to. That's what they're actually saying. And I always try to tell people when they tell me this, oh, it's so easy to get married. What I try to tell people is, you're wrong because they don't want to marry us. The men that you're referring to when you say, oh, all Muslim men want to marry a revert, which again is not true, but the men that they are referring to in that scenario do not want to marry us in most cases. What they want to do is they want to date us and then throw us out for a woman from their own culture when they're actually ready to get married. When they're mature, when they settle down, and when they want to do the right thing, the halal thing, they're not going to marry us. They're going to throw us out like garbage, never tell anyone about us, keep us a secret, their dirty secret, and then marry someone who's actually from their own culture because that's the acceptable thing for them to do. To be honest with you, even if they do marry us, because of course that does happen, even if they do marry us, sometimes it might be for status because a lot of times the men that I meet who are really interested in marrying a white revert, specifically like they want a white wife, they have an inferiority complex, and I can feel it. It's like it's tangible almost. I can see it in them. They have an inferiority complex. They have internalized racism, probably due to colonialism in their own countries. And they see, whiteness as goodness. Whatever is white is what's good. So they want to be have a closer proximity to whiteness. They want to have a white wife. They want to have light-skinned children. They want to be as white as possible. They want to change up their name or the name they go by because they don't want to come off as Arab or as Desi. Especially I see this with Desi communities, which makes me really sad because Desi culture is so rich and so beautiful, and I've always been so drawn to it. And especially for me, coming from a white American background, not feeling like I had much of a culture, I've always thought Desi culture was so rich and it's so old. It's been around forever and it's just beautiful. The food is like the best in the world. The clothes are beautiful, like everything. And it makes me so sad to think that people want to be white, especially like it's not like I don't feel bad that I'm white. I'm not saying you should feel bad about being white, but I'm saying you should be happy with the way Allah made you. Especially when Allah made you a part of such a beautiful culture and a beautiful, Desis are beautiful, Arabs are beautiful, everybody's beautiful. They shouldn't feel like they have to change themselves. And that's another tangent. But unfortunately, I see this a lot. This idea of I want to be white. I want to lighten my skin. I want to make sure I'm not dark. I want to have a white wife. I want to get a nose job. Okay? I hear that all the time. I want to get a nose job. And I'm like, who told you your nose is messed up? It's colonialism, okay? I'm just saying, like, it has its effects and it's still happening today. So that might be one reason that they're interested in white women. And I know for a fact it is because I've met men like that who so clearly hate themselves deep down. They hate their culture. They want as much distance from their culture as possible. And they want to just marry a white woman and just be American, basically. Now, that's one situation. It's not all of them, obviously, but that is one situation. And in other situations, there's many other reasons that these type of men, because I'm trying to specify, not all Muslim men who marry a revert are like this. Probably the majority of Muslim men who end up marrying a revert are not like this. But there are some men who specifically only want to marry a revert. They'll go out of their way to say, I only want to marry a revert. And they'll send me and other revert sisters messages like, are you married? If not, can I marry you? If you are married, can you find me another white revert? That's weird. That's not normal. And those are the men I'm talking about, not the men who, oh, you know what, I ended up falling in love with a revert and we got married. That's not what I'm talking about. And that's the majority of revert marriages, I would say. Of course, that's not what I'm talking about, though. So anyways, so that might be one reason that they want to be white, basically, or they want a white wife because they see it as better than their own culture, sadly. Another reason, if we're just being really honest, if you live in America, one reason that a man might be interested in a revert if he lives in another country is citizenship, because she is born in that country. And that can happen to like non-reverts as well, because let's say you're Pakistani or your culture's like culturally you're Pakistani, but you were born and raised in America, you're a citizen. That could just as easily happen to you. So I'm not saying that only happens to reverts, but that does happen. Again, minority of the case, but that can be a reason that these type of men look for reverts. So what I'm saying is, it's not easy for us to get married. And one sister said it best. She said, it's easy for us reverts to get married, just not to the right man. You see what I'm saying? And when she said that, I thought like, subhanAllah, like that's exactly the truth. That is so like on point. She commented that on one of my posts a long time ago. And I just like never forgot it. It's easier for us to get married. Clearly, from what I've been saying, you can tell there's lots of options, but few good options. And I think that's the case for pretty much all Muslims nowadays. I think a lot of Muslims feel that way. So after experiencing all of this for the last 3 years, pretty much everything I've mentioned so far, I have personally experienced it. After going through that for 3 years, I honestly got to a place where I was like, you know what? I kind of would rather just be single than settle for this. Like, I've never felt like that in my life because I've always been somebody who, like the way my mom says it is like, I think you're in love with the idea of love, which is, my mom's very wise and she probably has a point there. But you see what I'm saying? Like, I never, like before this experience, I never felt like, oh yeah, I'll just be single and I really don't care to get married. I never felt like that before. But after going through all of this for so long, for years, I just decided, like, I don't even know if I want to get married anymore. Like, this sucks. This is so painful and it's so difficult. Like, I don't even know if I want to do it anymore. And I honestly don't know the best place for reverts or any other Muslims to find a spouse. Like I said, I don't have a solution. The masjid is a great option. Of course, that's the best place you could meet someone. But is that the reality of, like, the way masjids are set up, that like we have spaces for Muslim men and women to meet? Not really, because if you're going to the masjid, maybe you're going for prayer and then a class after, right? So you go to prayer, we're separate for good reason, of course, but we're separate. We're not going to be talking during prayer or even after prayer. Men and women are not going to be talking, obviously. Then let's say you go to the class, we're separate. Again, we're separated. And again, for good reason, there's nothing wrong with that. But then afterwards, we're not going to be talking. We're not going to be socializing. In most cases, you know, men stick to men, women stick to women. And that's perfect when we're all married. But it's like difficult. I'm not saying it should be different, but I'm saying it's difficult when, you know, when you're not married, because it's like, okay, maybe there's someone you find like attractive. They catch your eye and you see that they're at the masjid, mashallah, like they seem like a good Muslim. But how are you supposed to talk to them? And especially for us reverts, we don't even have the backup desperation option of, mom and dad, can you find me someone? Because I know for a lot of Muslims, for born Muslims, like pretty much all born Muslims that I know, that's like their they're like emergency, like, break the glass, press the button, like we have nothing else left, like, the nuclear option, okay? Because for me, that option is like talking to the imam. And like I said, I don't feel like I'm at the place where I can do that. And I know a lot of Muslims who feel that way about talking to their parents and just saying, like, can you find someone for me? Because first of all, they know that maybe the person their parents will find them is like not the right person for them. And their parents are going to find someone from their own standards rather than their kids' standards. But also, they just maybe feel like it's like embarrassing or something. So anyways, for us reverts, we don't even have that. We don't have the backup option, that like the nuclear option, like the option of like, there's no other situation or there's no other choice. I guess I'll just do this. We don't even have it. And we're also not as connected in our Muslim communities as born Muslims until we've been Muslim for a very long time, obviously. So like even for me, I've been Muslim for 3 years, but I'm not nearly as connected in the community as somebody who, say, is a born Muslim but grew up like down the street from me. They're far more connected because they grew up with these people. They know these people. They know their families. Everybody knows each other. And they probably go to one central masjid, whereas I go to many different masjids because I need different things. Like I need to learn Arabic. I need to do this and that. My parents can't do that for me. So I'm going to all these different masjids for different things. So I feel like that happens with a lot of reverts. They don't end up as connected. And on top of all of that, let's just be honest. I've talked about this before. There are some serious biases against reverts. So no one's going to mention, hey, do you want to marry my son or my daughter? Nobody's going to mention that to a revert. That hardly ever happens. They, usually from my experience, born Muslim elders or, aunties or uncles who have single sons and daughters who are eligible for marriage, I don't know how else to say it other than they gatekeep their kids. And a lot of times, unfortunately, they gatekeep their kids in pursuit of a mediocre suitor who's from the exact same country as them, the exact same culture, rather than, God forbid, allowing their child to marry someone who they actually love, who actually practices the faith the way that, their child wants, is a good match for them, but also happens to be from a different ethnicity. You see what I'm saying? That happens a lot. I've noticed this so much where like the parents would literally rather their kid be with somebody who's just meh, but happens to be from exactly the same culture, rather than let them marry a revert who is really strong in their faith and who's a good match for them and they actually love each other. No. You just have to marry some random person who happens to be from our culture. I see that way too much. And it's not every Muslim family that's like that. Don't get me wrong. But a lot of them are. And if you're a revert, I know you know what I'm talking about. And if you're a born Muslim, I know you know what I'm talking about. Even if, mashallah, your family is different, that's amazing. But this is an issue across the ummah. And with some cultures more than others. But I'm not going to name names right now. Another issue that us reverts face, kind of connecting back to what I said about, like, we're not as connected in our communities, right? Like, we haven't been a part of our communities for as long as others. So this creates a difficulty of, we don't know if somebody's a good person or not, especially when we meet them online. So even if, like, let's say in the best case scenario, we meet someone at the masjid and they seem like perfect. If we're not super connected, we might not have someone there to come and tell us, hey, that guy's actually not a good guy. I know he comes to the masjid and that's great, but he actually is known to do X, Y, and Z. Or maybe not saying he's not a good guy, but they're just saying, I'm looking out for you. I would advise you not to pursue him. I wouldn't recommend him to you because he's known to do these things. He's known to not be a good suitor. And there's a reason he's not married. You see what I'm saying? That might happen if you were born and raised in the community, you would probably already know that. Nobody would have to tell you that because you probably already know, right? Because like people make a reputation for themselves after a certain amount of years. You get to know who people are. And so if you're a revert and you don't have anyone there protecting you, you don't have a wali. Let's talk about that. Reverts don't have walis a lot of the times. We don't have the securities that are built in for Muslim women into our faith, the like protections that are built in. We don't have a lot of those. So we might not know. We might actually just end up, meeting a person, falling for them, and then actually marrying them. And nobody warns us, hey, maybe you should look a little bit more into this or that, or I wouldn't really recommend this person. You know what I mean? And now that's even more exaggerated when we meet someone online, even if they're in the same city or country as us, let alone if they're not in the same city or country as us. Then we have like literally zero references. We have nobody that we could even potentially ask about them. We have nothing to go off of. You see what I'm saying? We have no character reference. We can't say to someone, hey, do you know so-and-so? Like, is he a good guy? Like, is he somebody you would recommend for marriage? We can't ask anyone. So we're just at the mercy of the person that we meet online, which is just the nature of online, dating apps and marriage apps. Like, that's just the way it is. But this is an issue for reverts, right? Because they could totally be lying to us. And let me tell you, that has happened to me before. So I've been like utterly lied to from a man who, he was from somewhere else. He moved here a number of years ago. He lived in a bit different area than me. And so I didn't have anyone, we didn't have any mutual connections that I could just ask about him. So he lied like a major, major lie about his life. And I knew something was off, and alhamdulillah, it didn't go anywhere because I knew something was off, but I didn't know what the lie was. I found out later. And every time I use these Muslim marriage apps and everything, I see the same person on there lying about the same thing. So, may Allah guide them. But do you see what I'm saying? They could just totally lie to you, and there's really no way to know. You have to trust your instinct. But a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people gaslight themselves and think, well, but he's a good guy. Or they're feeling desperate, which I've totally been in that situation before where I'm like, but I really want to get married. So maybe I'm just like feeling off, but like it's not true what I'm feeling. No, girl, always trust your instinct. Just assume, assume the worst, to be honest, because a lot of times they are lying. Not to scare you, but like just do your research is what I'm saying. So again, we just have to kind of take their word for it and hope that they're telling us the truth. And even if they're not outright lying at all, they might be completely misrepresenting themselves and only emphasizing the good parts and neglecting to mention the bad parts of their personality on their profile, which is like that. Again, this is just the nature of online, matchmaking. You're not going to come out and say, hey, I have these vices, I'm not good at this and that, and I'm struggling with these things. Of course, you want to emphasize the good things, but some people do it to the point where it's almost lying. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not just like kind of putting your best face forward and just trying to be yourself, but they actually like go out of their way to actively hide certain things about themselves and, hype up the good things about themselves to the point, again, where it's misrepresentation and almost lying. This has also happened to me, unfortunately, especially when it comes to pretending to be religious, pretending to pray all the time, pretending to just present yourself as this very religious, pious person, when in reality, they're actually engaging in very serious, major sins that they're trying to hide and trying to cover up. Or they are, they're not really that religious. They just kind of present themselves that way because it makes them feel good. And only Allah knows somebody's heart. Only Allah knows someone's intention. But you don't want to marry somebody who's not a good Muslim. Duh. So that happens too. So basically what I'm saying is us reverts, particularly us revert sisters, are in a very vulnerable position because we don't have a family to back us up. We don't have a character reference for the men we meet most of the time. Sometimes we know less about the faith because we're newer to the faith. So we're at a disadvantage in that way. And on top of all of that, we're vulnerable because we are completely alone as reverts. We're lonely. We're hurting. We've been through a lot. We might have been rejected by our family and friends. And we really want to find a spouse so that we can grow in our faith with them and so we can have someone to experience life with and potentially have a Muslim family with. So that makes us vulnerable as well because we really want to meet someone. Most reverts I know really want to be married, So it's a very difficult issue. At the end of the day, it's very complicated and I don't really know how to navigate it for myself or for any other reverts. It's very complicated and I pray about it all the time. I pray for myself, but I pray for all reverts and all Muslims that it becomes easier because this is a huge issue. I know so many revert sisters who are struggling with the exact same thing. And who also have pretty much either given up on the idea of ever getting married or who are currently divorced and are just trying to heal. They're just not even considering marriage right now because they're like, I need to get through this pain. I need to get over the trauma a lot of times of the divorce I went through and the marriage, not to mention. So they're just not even thinking about getting married. So a lot of sisters are hurting. Honestly, a lot of sisters are hurting. and brothers too. Now, the most important thing to remember, of course, and I should have mentioned this at the top of the episode, is that everything is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His timing is perfect. And I'm not in any way trying to make it seem like Allah makes mistakes. Astaghfirullah. Of course, He does not make any mistakes, subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's perfect. His timing is perfect. His plan is perfect. And even if we can't see it in the moment, everything He does is, or, everything that happens in our life is according to His plan. And He has a plan for all of us. He has, everything is written for us. He has a spouse written for us, inshaAllah. Everything He has planned is perfect. So I'm not trying to say like, man, this sucks. Like Allah didn't, plan someone for me or something like that. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. I'm not trying to be negative at all. My point of talking about all of this is to just bring attention to the reality of the situation and the reality that something really needs to change, because it's not going anywhere right now and it's only getting worse. I want to bring this up because a lot of times I hear people saying things like I mentioned earlier, it's easy for reverts to get married. And as I mentioned, no, it is not. And I hear people saying, why don't you just go to the masjid to get married? Why is it so difficult, especially from the older generation? So that's why I bring up these topics. That's why I wanted to talk about this issue today on this episode. This is more of an episode just shedding light on an issue rather than providing a solution, like I mentioned. And I am sorry to be negative. I do apologize for the negativity that I expressed in this episode. I don't mean to just be negative and just leave it there and be like, well, there's no solution. Okay, bye. But I just wanted to be genuine and express my feelings and express the pain that I have been through at the hands of Muslim families who will absolutely not let their children marry a revert, who keep their children away from reverts, away from anyone else, and who refuse to let anyone accept their own culture into their family, which is not a part of Islam. It has never been a part of Islam. And it's not okay. And I wanted to bring attention to it because a lot of times people don't want to talk about this topic. They get sensitive about it. They don't want to bring it up. They don't want to offend anyone. And like I mentioned with a lot of us revert sisters, they're hurting. They're in pain. They don't need to talk about it because they already went through it. They experienced it. So they don't want to bring it up again. But that's why I'm talking about it, because nobody else seems to be. And the reality is, because this issue is so prevalent, a lot of revert sisters, and honestly sisters in general, but especially revert sisters, end up with an abusive husband, a lying husband who only wanted to be with her because she's white, or because she's honestly any other ethnicity that, born Muslims usually are not that ethnicity. Or they end up with a husband whose family makes them choose between the wife and the family. And let me just tell you, guess who he's going to choose most of the time? It's not the girl. It's not the woman. So a lot of sisters I've seen have ended up with just horrible men. Revert sisters have ended up with men who treat them so bad, who are not good Muslims, who are not even practicing Muslims. But of course, again, they present themselves as one way and then the reality is something else. So this is what's happening. This is the reality. Revert sisters are actively being hurt right now. And they're healing from the pain that they've already went through and the divorces that they've already went through and the sins that they've committed because the man tempted them into it. And everybody's responsible for their sins. I'm not trying to say, it's all the fault of someone else. But a lot of times these sisters are vulnerable. They don't know everything about the faith. This has happened to me where I didn't know as much. I was brown and revert, and men will swoop in and take advantage of that and push their boundaries and make them do things they're uncomfortable with because they don't know that you're not supposed to do that as a Muslim. Muslim women are being taken advantage of, are being hurt, and they're having a hard time finding good spouses because there are so many families that are actively choosing to not let their good Muslim men, the good Muslim sons that they have, marry reverts. And I just want you to know that because they're doing that, this is what's happening as a result. Reverts are ending up with these kind of men. So I wanted to bring attention to this. I'm sorry if it was a bit heavy-handed, but I'm very passionate about this issue because it's affected me and it's affected pretty much every single revert sister I know. Almost every single one. So I ask you kindly to please make dua for your revert brothers and sisters, especially us sisters, that we're able to find a pious spouse who treats us with kindness and fairness and love, who is the coolness of our eye. And I ask you also to make dua for the ummah at large, Because again, like I mentioned a few times, it is not just the reverts that are suffering in this way. It's not just reverts who are having a hard time finding a spouse. So I ask Allah that it becomes easier for all of us, my born Muslim brothers and sisters, as well as my revert Muslim brothers and sisters. I ask Allah that it's becomes easier for all of us to find a good spouse and to be able to have good, wholesome Muslim families. Ameen. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something today, or you were able to, this episode resonated with you and you're able to relate to it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you again so much for listening. And please keep us reverts in your du'as and keep the whole ummah in your du'as, because I definitely will be doing that. Asalaamu alaikum.